Able to Zebra by Wilson Tucker. Originally published in the March 1953 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, it appeared in the January 1967 issue of an Italian magazine and was included in 3 collections of the author's stories: the Science-Fiction Subtreasury in 1954, Time X in 1955, and The Best of Wilson Tucker in 1982. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Able to Zebra. Horace Reed kicked aside the thoroughly scanned copy of the New York Times and finished the last of the coffee in his breakfast cup. With no real interest, he reached for the San Francisco Chronicle and lazily thumbed through its pages. Both of the papers were a day old, and he had known the news they contained 24 hours ago, while it was still fresh. But still, it was his daily chore to read those and the others littering the floor. Situated at the opposite ends of the country as those two were, they might contain some small item of purely local interest that his own Chicago papers would never know. The important national news came over the radio, of course. Listening to that, too, was a weary chore. But it was the occasional regional story that needed his attention. Horace dropped the Chronicle after a while and reached for the coffee percolator. Empty. He looked over the table, found nothing more to eat other than the broken crusts of the toast, and resigned himself. Carefully lighting a cigarette, he reached for the Morning Tribune. The matter was on page 8. Horace studied the story slowly at first, after working his way through the headline. He supposed he would never get used to the tight, compact, and not always sensible combination of words the headline writers here employed to gain attention. Prof denies Indians swapped wampum for pennies. Digesting that with but a second's hesitation, he grasped the headline's message. Some professor had denied that native aborigines exchanged their money for that of others. So? That was worth a headline? He swept on into the body of the story and was abruptly jerked to attention. According to the brief dispatch, filed by AP from a small Illinois river town the preceding evening, a Professor Forrester of State Normal University and his class of archaeology students had unearthed a new Indian mound along the banks of the Illinois, one of many that had been located in the region. Other than the normal student excitement over the find, the opening and preparing of the mound had followed in the usual manner. A number of skeletons were uncovered, along with their paraphernalia, weapons, beads, pottery, and trinkets. In one corner of the mound, the definitely unusual turned up. The skeleton of a one-armed Indian was located, with that one bony arm wrapped possessively around a glass jar full of Indian head pennies. Horace stopped reading to consider that. "By George," he said, and then he giggled. Old Forrester at first believed he was the victim of a student hoax, a belief shared by a Mr. J. Tolliver, official representative of the State Archaeology Society, who was attached to the class on this field trip. Following an emphatic denial by the students, a minute examination of the find proved that no hoax was involved. Both Forrester and Tolliver agreed in declaring that the mound and its complete contents were of equal antiquity. The one-armed Indian and his strange treasure had been buried together about 400 years ago. Officials of the state and experts at the University of Illinois were hurrying to the scene. Horace said, "By George," once more, and dropped the newspaper. The giggle spread across his face in a wide grin, and soon he was laughing aloud. From his bookshelf he pulled a large volume, leafing through it until he found a relief map of the state. After that he put in a long-distance telephone call to the chief of police in the river town. Posing as a reporter for a radio wire service, he queried the policeman on the previous night's discovery and on recent developments since then. There were no new developments, he learned, except that carloads of people had arrived from the state capital, the university, and every other city in town within a 100-mile radius to examine and gawk at the uncovered mound. It was creating quite a traffic problem, the chief declared. The mound itself? No, nothing new there. The experts still wrangled. Horace thanked him and hung up. Carefully removing all traces of amusement from his voice and thoughts, he placed the palm of his hand close to the partly opened mouth and blew a hot breath on it, activating the metal plate beneath his skin. Presently, there was a queer ringing in his ears. "Zebra," he said to the palm. "Location. Love." "Abel here," the voice of a tired old man said in his ear. "Yes." Horace stifled an inner thrill. He had never spoken to Abel before, had never made contact with anyone that highly placed in official circles. After all, Zebra was on the lowest rung of the seniority list, and he seldom had the opportunity to know the really top persons and places. Abel himself. "I have to report an anachronism, sir." "Oh, my stars," the old man said. "Another one? Your location is Love, did you say?" "Yes, sir. I'm on change of duty, sir. I understand someone else is filling my former position on—" I know all that," Abel interrupted testily. "I sent the substitute to Zebra myself. Very well, what is this one? And don't tell me it's another magnetic motor." Horace took a deep breath. "No, sir. There haven't been any more of those since Hendershot in 1928. This is quite different. A university class opened a mass grave of native aborigines last evening, sir. They found in the grave a glass jar containing coins, minted some 400 years later. The coins bore the images of those same aborigines, by peculiar coincidence, and were minted by the present-day government as a sort of token to them." "Oh my, oh my, oh my," Abel's tired voice ejaculated. "This is worse than I thought. This is much worse than the motors. Oh, this is dreadful." He paused for a long moment, and Horace could almost picture the old man ponderously shaking his head. "What is your exact location and date?" "Chicago, Illinois," Horace told him, and added the street address. He shot a quick glance at the morning paper. "Wednesday, July 9th, 1952. "Oh, my stars," Abel repeated. "I'll have to send you assistance at once." "Will that be necessary, sir?" Horace broke in boldly. "I realize that I'm new here, but I'd like the chance to prove my—" No, positively no," the old one cut him off. "Out of the question, young man. No reflection on your able judgment intended. This is far more serious than you may realize. Far more serious indeed. That present government of yours? Who can I send you?" Horace waited, not daring to suggest. Vaguely in his ear, he heard the Ancient One running down the list of his operatives' code names. Abel, Baker, Charlie, Dog, Easy, Fox. The cosmic leader paused briefly over Fox, considering that worthy for a moment before continuing his low rumble. Suddenly he raised his voice with decision. "I'll send you either Charlie or Dog. Must look to see who is free right now. Make no move until arrival." "Yes, sir," Horace said with concealed disappointment. Out, Abel said wearily. Oh, my. Horace dropped his hand to his lap, vaguely annoyed with the old one. He couldn't disobey his superior, but this was such a perfect opportunity to display his talents. Really, the first opportunity he'd had, for his own little world was a dull place. Nothing ever happened there. Perhaps if he... Horace seized the phone book, searching for the addresses of the nearest library and a costumer's shop. He could at least lay the groundwork for a scheme shaping up in his mind, could at least hope to interest Charlie or Dog in the scheme. For a long moment he contemplated the newspapers on the floor, and then he giggled once more. I think it rather funny, he said to his apartment walls. Just imagine Indian head pennies. Bottom-rung agent Zebra, alias Horace Reed, in Chicago, lazily pushed himself up on the oversized bed and stretched. Another day, another stack of the native newspapers to go through, another struggle with the cryptic headlines, and another 3 or 4 meals of the delicious love variety. The newspapers might not always make sense, but the planet Love provided him with the most tempting, satisfying food he had ever known. His own little world of Zebra, a primitive and volcanic mud ball, had nothing to compare with the edibles of Love. Why, he wondered next, had operative Love ever left Love, causing him, Zebra, to vacate Zebra and patrol Love during the man's absence? He moved over to the edge of the bed and dangled a bare foot. Code names were all right in their place, too, but it tended to be confusing when the overseer of a planet temporarily left the place. To make it all simpler, why didn't Abel patrol his Abel, Baker take care of Baker, and so on down the line to Zebra on Zebra, with special troubleshooters coming in during these emergencies? But no, that wasn't such a happy thought either. In that event, he, Zebra, wouldn't have discovered the wonderful cookery of Love. And returning to primitive Zebra after this tour of duty would be like returning to work after a very pleasant vacation. Horace sighed and slipped out of bed to pad across the room in bare feet, liking the sounds his feet made on the floor. Pushing open the swinging door to the kitchenette, he stopped stock still to stare at the blonde. Primitive Zebra had no blondes like that, either. She glanced up quickly from the small white stove and smiled at him, a beautiful thing to receive so early in the morning. "Good morning, Zebra. You're a late sleeper." Horace brightened. "Charlie, sir?" he asked, hopefully. This was wonderful. This was unexpected. To awaken and find a ravishing blonde person in one's kitchenette was an unusual treat, even though the blonde was one's superior officer. So she was to work with him on the ease. The girl shook her head. "Dog." Zebra Horace considered that doubtfully. She was, in the current vernacular, a cute trick, a rare dish, even though she held considerable seniority over him, and he must remember to be properly deferential. He said respectfully, "We'll have to give you a new name here, sir. Chicago, 1952, might not appreciate a blonde dog." "Agreed." She smiled, that rare smile once more, and continued the preparation of breakfast. "What name are you using here?" "Horace Reed." "Then I had best be Mrs. Horace Reed." There was a little more than just casual amusement in her voice. "I'll be staying here, and your people will talk." "Yes, sir." She indicated the meal on the stove and then motioned to him. "This is almost ready. Why not put on some clothes?" Horace looked down at himself and ran for the bedroom. Dog proved herself a remarkable cook. Working through the breakfast with appreciation and relish, Horace glanced up at her as the quick thought struck him. "You've been here before." "Briefly." She nodded the attractive golden head across the table. "During one of the earlier wars. Something about tea and taxes, I believe." Her lovely brown eyes rested seriously on his face. "Don't let yourself like it too well. You can't stay." "I can't help it," Zebra confessed. "You are a wonderful cook, sir." The girl abruptly switched the subject. "Tell me about your problem." Abel was very upset and very sketchy. He outlined it to her while they ate, explaining the ancient customs among these particular aborigines of mass burial, together with their favorite weapons, their treasures and personal charms and omens. Today, certain sciences had advanced to the point where individuals and groups were now actively seeking and opening these burial mounds for study purposes. The grave, opened 2 days before, had contained, in addition to the usual accoutrements, the most perplexing anachronism: a glass jar filled with coins minted by the present government some 4 centuries after the burial. This particular jar was found in such a position and condition that responsible authorities at the site were forced to only one conclusion: Indian and money had been buried together. The morning news reports, he indicated the papers on the floor, could shed no further light on the discovery. Most scientific authorities were taking a serious and puzzled view of the situation, and some government agents were already en route from the nation's capital to examine the find, to study the coins for authenticity. Dog shook her golden head. "That is bad. Quite obviously we can't substitute counterfeit coins, for that, too, would be anachronistic. What about the students?" "Too late," Zebra Horace answered. "If I could have reached one of them immediately after the opening of the grave, I could have arranged a hoax. But it is far too late now. The students are adamant, and just as puzzled." "No wonder the old one was so upset." Dog drummed her fingers on the tabletop. "Do you suppose we can erect an ancient tunnel beneath the site? Arrange it so that the jar of money was brought into the tunnel and placed in the grave from below, merely as a hiding place?" "No, sir, not there. The terrain and the nearby river forbid it. And, too, I suspect that the external evidence on the jar proves its equal age, else the scientists involved would have by now passed it off as hoax or accident." When she didn't answer, he continued. "It's a peculiar type of humor involved, sir. These aborigines are called Indians by the present populace, and the coins are known as Indian head pennies because they bear the image of an Indian. Do you appreciate that?" "I appreciate it," she told him dryly. "But wait until you advance. You'll find some you won't think so humorous." Zebra felt as though he had been set back in his place, forcibly reminded of his lower seniority and lack of cosmic experience. He said quietly, "Yes, sir." "Don't sir me. The name is Dog." She smiled to take away the sting. "There aren't so many of the anachronisms left anymore. We've done a fair job of weeding them out, but still, now and then one turns up such as this, and we have a job on our hands. Some of them are humorous, some are cruel, some subtle. Frankly, the latter aren't so difficult to dispose of. Often they are so subtle as to defeat their own purpose, and we are able to remove them before the truth is realized. The cruel and the humorous give us more trouble." Horace nodded sympathetically. "Well, children are like that, sometimes cruel, sometimes subtle, sometimes deadly in an innocent way." "They are," she agreed. "And if we had recognized that fact earlier and watched them more closely, superintended their every idle hour as well as their training periods, all this wouldn't be necessary. That particular group of errant boys wouldn't have caused this mischief, wouldn't have made it necessary to set up a constant watch of the 26 worlds to undo their misdeeds. Dog waved a slim hand toward the morning sunlight spilling in the window. You will notice they seemed to concentrate on this neighborhood. I haven't found anything on Zebra, Zebra told her. Not in all the years I've been there. They probably never strayed that far. The teachers missed them early and did a quick job of rounding them up. Most of the troubles have appeared here and in 3 or 4 other worlds. King had a bad time a few years ago. King? Horace Zebra questioned. Oh, yes. He's on the one with a dark star. King. The boys introduced sundials on King. Poor King had an awful time rounding them up and explaining them away. Well, she shrugged and made as if to push back from the table. It can't happen again, and when we have finally erased the last anachronism, found and eliminated the last hybrid, the last childish joke, our job is over. So let us concentrate on the immediate problem. The hoax and tunnel angles are eliminated. Have you thought of any other possible solutions? Yes, sir, he told her eagerly. I tried to interest Abel, but he... Well, sir, I favor a time machine explanation. No, absolutely not. Dog stood up too quickly, and her chair toppled backward. This planet does not have and will never have time machines. Thank Mekhob for small favors. Time machines are foreign to this world, unheard of. The people haven't so much as dreamed of them. You shall not introduce them as the solution. Oh, no, Horace protested quickly. He left the table and hurried around to her. I wasn't thinking of their introduction, sir. Only the suggestion of same. A mere suspicion that they might exist. You see, sir, a peculiar situation exists here. One very ripe for exploitation. I feel sure we can use it to our advantage and sow suspicion. There is a phenomenon on this planet known as science-fiction magazines. The natives are positively crazy about them. They publish incredible fantasy and science romances, wild adventure yarns of the prehistoric past, even wilder tales of the probable future. They print... He broke off in frustrated eagerness. Please, sir, come with me. These science fiction things defy description. You have to see them to believe them. He was gently tugging on her arm. Well... Dog hesitated, searching his face. You really think we can use them? Where is this? Just down the block, sir. A book and magazine store. Zebra hesitated with a sudden bashfulness. And, sir, I think perhaps you'd best slip something over your shoulders. He carefully avoided a direct stare at her bare poitrine. I may have something in the wardrobe. Chicago, 1952. Zebra led her gaily down the stairs of the apartment building and out onto the street, both of them blinking against the bright summer sun. Together they walked to the corner, skillfully avoiding caroming children on roller skates to cross the intersection and continue down another street. Eagerly, Zebra pointed to a small sign swaying in the gentle breeze. There, see? Mahaffey's Rocket Shop. It is run by a young lady who formerly edited a science fiction magazine. She made a fortune and retired to open this bookstore. Just wait until you see these things. I wish I could share your enthusiasm, Dog said. The magazines are marvelous. Quite like our nursery tales, really. They constantly employ rocket ships, great inventions, fantastic battles, horrible monsters, anything. Nothing seems too wild for them, for their readers. And by the proper planting and use, our time machine concept could be made into an accepted thing here. Fictionally, of course. We could so skillfully implant our idea that several writers would seize upon it, enlarge it, make it into a common device. We could cause the time machine to become as well known as the rocket ship. And through these very magazines and books, we could accomplish our misdirection. They paused before the store and inspected a tiny display window. Zebra pointed silently to a row of magazines embellished with garish covers, and just behind them a row of books. The blonde dog stepped closer to examine the magazine covers, glancing from one to another. Finally, she looked up at her waiting companion. "You needn't have been so concerned with my lack of clothing," she pointed out. "These women are wearing about the same." Zebra Horace fought away a slow blush. "These pictures merely illustrate the romances, sir. Quite typical of the fiction, and perhaps indoor family wear as well. But you mustn't be seen like that on the streets." He moved in beside her to waggle an index finger. "These are only a sampling. There are dozens more inside. The publishers have designed them to appeal to all ages and tastes, from the cradle to the grave and from the schizoid to the scholar, so to speak. Their titles are frequently indicative: 44 caliber space adventures, wanton worlds. That cover is rather obvious, isn't it? Universal science fiction. I read that one myself. It's quite good. Shall we go inside?" He held the door open for her and followed her in, nodding at a young woman and a couple of boys near the back of the shop. "That's Miss Mahaffey, the owner," he whispered. "The young males are fans." "Are what?" Dog demanded. "Science fiction followers, avid purchasers and readers. They read everything that is published. They and the millions like them are the ones I hope to dupe with my scheme." Zebra and the girl stopped before a large rack of magazines. He reached for a couple, opened them at random, and handed them to her. "As yet," he explained, "the time machine is unknown. You'll find no mention of such here." "And your scheme?" she asked. "Has 2 equal parts, sir, each part dependent on the other for the success of the whole, and I firmly believe that success will easily explain away the anachronism of the Indian coins. My plan is first to induce one of the science fiction editors to send a special correspondent to the gravesite, a man having a splendid reputation in his trade, and who would make a thorough analytical study of the anachronism to finally arrive at the only acceptable answer, according to his logic: a time machine. But there are no— Please, sir, hear me out. Your objection is to the second part of my scheme, which will be taken care of. Now, of course, the reserved scientific world will not believe our special correspondent. They'll laugh at him. But the science fiction readers, these fans will believe him. And as time goes on and no one else is able to offer an alternative theory, the correspondence report will be more or less accepted. Thereafter, official government circles will either ignore the matter entirely, as is their wont, or they will engage in secret experiments looking toward the discovery and building of such a machine. Horace smiled. This last would prove quite harmless, of course. "I'm still dubious," the girl told him, glancing from the shelves to the fans loitering in the rear. "These magazines have just about the proper historical background to fit our special needs," Horace broke in. "Let me brief you. The man or men who first published them were dreamers and visionaries beyond the norm, and in time so many of their dreams and prophecies came to pass that their fellow men took notice, thereby gaining for the magazines a small measure of fame. Some of the guesses and dreams proved remarkably accurate, you see. so accurate as to command attention. Of late, 3 other events have occurred which added greatly to the prestige of the publications, events giving them an added stature in the eyes of the public. Dog listened skeptically, but in silence. The first of these occurrences was the application of atomic power, more properly, raw nuclear fission of low order for war use. The magazines had long since employed such power in their pages, and one renowned writer had foretold atomic bombs. The one important event, however, was a story which closely described a bomb-detonating mechanism, a story published at the very moment the government was developing that mechanism in secret. It was so real that government security agents were alarmed, and naturally, after the close of the war, this news leaked out and widespread publicity followed. Vast sections of the reading public turned to science fiction, seeking other things their government may have hidden from them. Sometime following that, several of the magazines boldly attempted to explain a series of celestial objects termed flying saucers or discs, while the military authorities declaimed and vainly suggested mass hallucinations. The magazines scoffed at their declaimers and set about providing otherwise by photographs, eyewitness accounts, and so forth. Again, the result was widespread publicity, and again, large masses of the lay public swung toward the magazines. Their power was becoming strongly entrenched. He dropped his voice to a whisper. That was how Miss Mahaffey made her fortune and retired to this shop. Her magazine was one of the leaders in the flying saucer mystery. And the third event? Dog asked stolidly. The crowning achievement, Horace told her. It was so new and revolutionary that it raised a storm in both lay and scientific circles. Science fiction magazines, early in their lives, introduced the idea of an orbital satellite, mainly as a sort of stepping-off place for interplanetary flights, but also incidentally usable for observation and military control of the planet itself. These fictional space platforms were seized upon by one government, and intensive research was begun to build and launch such an object. Before they could do so, however, they were conquered by a second government, which promptly took over the plans and started to work on a platform of their own. Of course, the magazines were quick to point out that they had originated the concept many decades before, that the governments were merely copying their ideas again. The public applauded. I'm beginning to see your point, but go on. The result of all this, after many years, is a state of undeclared war between the magazines and the governments. In some few countries, the publications are forbidden altogether. In others, severe restrictions are imposed upon them. Right here in Chicago, no magazine is permitted to reveal that the critical mass of U-235 is just 22.7 pounds, yet that figure is common knowledge over much of the world. The magazines realize they have the upper hand because their editors and authors are years ahead of the politicians, whereas the politicians and bureaucrats do their best to hamper and restrict the magazines, rather naively believing they still have secrets the public at large is unfit to know. Unwilling to admit that thinking men the world over know their secrets, they regard the science fiction magazines as arch-enemies for revealing them, hinting at them, employing them in fiction. Caught squarely in the middle, of course, is the lay public, and this very situation is the weapon to solve our case. The public, now, realizing they're in the middle, are swinging in ever-increasing numbers toward the magazines because these publications have been so right in the past, with the politicians so wrong or untruthful. Their distrust of the politician dates back for thousands of years. In short, then, sir, if we suddenly introduce the startling concept of a time machine, the local government will immediately deny it, and the public, noting that denial, will believe the magazines. The beautiful dog replaced the magazines she had been holding. "Is there an alternative to the time machine?" she asked doubtfully. Suddenly she pointed to a book on a nearby shelf. "What about that man, Fort? Your predecessor used him to advantage." "Oh, no, sir. Fort is a different sort of proposition altogether. The man is considered by most to be a crank or a crackpot, and very few place any faith in him. My predecessor did use him well, but in a reverse manner. For instance, upon 2 or 3 occasions, some of the natives have discovered what they term magnetic motors. The children's toys, really. I don't know if our truants left them behind on purpose or by accident. In the previous century, public curiosity wasn't what it is today, and the first 2 toys didn't present so much of a problem. But on the 3rd occasion, my predecessor arranged to have the motor exposed and its finder labeled a jokester. He also saw to it that Fort seized upon it, as well as the 2 earlier examples. The misdirection worked very well there, but we can't use Fort, sir, his reputation being the opposite of what we wish to accomplish here." Dog stalked along the aisle, examining the books and periodicals, her eyes resting momentarily on the titles. "The Conquest of Space," "The City in the Sea," "The Haploids." "You believe, then, that the time machine explanation is best?" "Yes, sir, I do. Knowing these people and their vivid imaginations, it seems to be the only sure solution." "How quickly could you induce an editor to dispatch an investigator to the graves?" "In an hour or less. We can place a man on the site this afternoon. And, sir, we'd best arrange to have the man release a part of his findings to tomorrow's newspapers. That will lay the groundwork and serve to establish the theory early, for the magazine itself will not be able to publish his findings for another month or 2. "Possibly you are right. I admit I can see no other solution. But wait, you said there were 2 parts. And what are you going to do about introducing the concept? I understand your solution as far as it goes, but—" Zebra Horace quickly caught her arm and guided her out of the bookshop. The sun was still bright in their eyes. He led the way back to his apartment, talking rapidly. "Introducing the concept is the second part of my plan, sir. I've done a bit of research at the library and have found the proper time and location to implant the concept. Several years ago, a writer did a series of articles for a paper called Science School's Journal. These articles, he entitled them The Chronic Argonauts, contain a germ of an idea that we can put to our own use. I propose to visit that writer, to place him in economic jeopardy. The Chronic Argonauts and our science fiction correspondent will serve us very well." They climbed the stairway. "I don't know," the lovely dog replied, frowning. She waited while the man unlocked the apartment door and stood aside to let her enter. "That sounds frightfully vague." Zebra Horace closed the door behind him, trying to hide his anxiety. She surely wouldn't dismiss his plan of action now. He ran over to the wardrobe and brought out some costumes he had rented, crossed the room again to fling open the door to an unused room. "Please, sir, trust me. I want so much to prove my mettle to you and Abel." The gleaming metal framework of his time machine rested in the darkness of the inner room. Boldly, Horace vaulted into the saddle and held out his 2 arms to her. After a moment's hesitation, Dog allowed herself to be lifted up into his lap. Horace threw a small lever. It was early morning, the sun not yet over the rim of buildings across the street. A cold, swirling fog hung in the air, chilling them. "We could have been better prepared," Dog said shortly. "Is this the right place?" "Yes, sir. This is known as Mornington Road. The man we seek lives in that rooming house across the way, with a lovely young woman who is not his wife. Their present circumstances aren't particularly pleasant. Both the writer and his lady friend are consumptive. His markets are falling off. No one seems very interested in his scientific articles, and his absent wife has presented him with a troublesome bill of divorcement. As a result, he is in a somewhat dejected mood and is considering moving to a house in the country." Horace made sure the shrubbery concealed his machine and stepped out to explore the street. Now, presently he will come out in his night clothes to see what may be in the mailbox. At that moment I will approach him and pass myself off as a visiting writer from the continent. I will instill in him the idea of rewriting the Chronic Argonauts as a scientific romance, and at this point I need your help, sir." "My help? How?" She peered across the street at the house, annoyed with the damp fog. Horace slipped a bit of paper into her hand. "This is the address of an editor named Henley, a good friend of our writer. Henley recently lost his magazine and is searching for financial backing to launch another. If you please, sir, I want you to journey about 1 week into the future and offer the financial aid the editor needs. With a new magazine in his hands, Henley is sure to request our writer for material. And in the meanwhile, I will have convinced the man to take a vacation in the country and rewrite the articles." "Zebra," she replied sharply, "I have heard of some fantastic schemes to explain or hide anachronisms during my career, but this one is the—" She broke off cautiously as a door opened across the street. "Please," Zebra Horace implored, "please, sir, help me on this. This is my first big job. Go see that man Henley and meet me back here in a few hours." He turned away from her and stepped into the street, calling across to the man in the doorway. "George! Hello there, George! Is that you?" The Chicago sun had grown quite warm, and the streets were reflecting up the heat, making the city uncomfortable. Children skated more slowly, if at all, preferring to lounge in the shade or spend their time in inviting doorways. A confident Horace led the beautiful girl along the street, crossing an intersection to turn in another direction. Eagerly he pointed to a small sign hanging motionless in the heat of day. "Look, sir! Mahaffey's time capsule! Our friend's Chronic Argonauts has accomplished everything!" They paused a moment outside the store and inspected the tiny display window. Zebra pointed silently to a row of magazines embellished with garish covers, and just behind them a row of books. The blonde Dog stepped closer to examine the magazine covers, glancing from one to another. Finally she looked up at her waiting companion. "The titles would certainly seem to indicate you are right," she conceded. "Just look at them. Slave Goddess of the Time Worn, Ravished in Time's Abyss, The Rape of the Time Maidens." She shook her blonde head in wonderment. "All the writers seem to have caught the idea. Heinlein, Bradbury, Marlowe, Mudgett, Shaver, Birdbath." Zebra held the shop door open for her, followed her into the cool interior. He nodded to the young woman and a couple of boys near the back of the store. "My plan of action must be a success, sir, and our special correspondent will visit the gravesite this afternoon." He pointed happily to a shelf of books. "See? The Omnibus of Time. Adventures in time and space. We have planted well. Zebra was searching the shelves carefully, eagerly, searching for a particular title. Suddenly he reached down to snatch a slim blue volume from its resting place. Here it is. Dog turned the book around to read the legend on the spine. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. We did this? Yes, sir. This started it all. That man in the rooming house? Suddenly, unexpectedly, Dog kissed him full on the lips. The shop mistress and the two fans turned to watch, startled. Zebra, the blonde said excitedly. You are wonderful. I shall report this to Abel with my highest recommendations. And do you know what we're going to do now? No, sir, he stammered, taken aback. Don't sir me, she reproved him. The name is Dog, and until I am recalled to duty, the name is Mrs. Horace Reed. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.